We create conversations. It's what we do on arrow.net, ARROE.net. All right, let's pod crash. Episode number 144 is with Megan Devine from the podcast Hereafter.
I am fabulous. Thank you.
The creation of your new podcast Hereafter is coming at the right time. And I think that more people are getting back in their cars. They're at their offices again and stuff like that. And they need someone to be there with them that can relate with them. And you really do open up that platform.
I do. I think what we really need is permission to talk about this stuff. Mm-hmm. The things that I talk about, they aren't new. Like human hardships and emotional challenges, these are not new things, but the permission to talk about them, I feel like, is a new thing.
When you say giving permission to talk about it, because I'm a daily writer, I've been doing it for 28 years, and that's one of the things that I had to do was give myself permission to be transparent on that page. I don't care if anybody reads my journals. It's who I am.
Isn't that funny, though, that when you started out, you had to give yourself permission to tell your own self the truth?
Right.
That's
because
fascinating.
I do a defrag journal, and in that defrag journal, it's my subconscious talking to my conscious mind, and I sit there and break things down because I've got to have answers to situations so I can locate solutions.
I love the defrag journal. I've never heard that. That's fantastic. And that I feel like that is what telling the truth does, whether you tell the truth to yourself on your own page, like as you're writing, or you find the courage to tell the truth to somebody else, right? We're sort of weeding through all of the garbled messages inside so that we can find a through line.
Isn't that the truth? The name of the podcast is Hereafter, and I'll tell you, as a creative mind, this is what I picked up immediately when I found out about the podcast. You are here after something has happened to us. You're telling us that no matter what, you are going to be here after.
That is correct. Yes, I really like titles that mean more than one thing. So for me, Hereafter is that. Like, here you are after this horrible thing happened. And we're going to be here after this horrible thing happened with you and for you. And that is really the nature of the show, to find out how to be better supporters, be better helpers. Even if we're talking about how do you support yourself, and then also how do you support the others in your sphere. We need to find out how to be here after anything that disrupts our lives.
That's very, very spiritual in the way, because I practice Buddhism as well as do my meditation and stuff like that. I'm in the presence of now, living mindfully in my present. Yes, and I think that a lot of people think that means that nothing that happened before this moment is supposed to affect them. And that is just not how humans work. I think that we get into that struggle of like, wait, no, I'm not supposed to be attached to anything that happened, right? That whole, like, the real spiritual practice is to be unattached from anything. And like, well, that's not what's happened. That's not what happens for human beings. We make attachments, and attachments are beautiful. How do we learn how to live in those attachments with less turbulence? Oh my God, my first wife, we would sit there, and we were crazy teenagers that happened to get married up in Montana illegally. But the thing is that she would sit there and say, is it happening right now? No, then it didn't happen. And I would sit there going, oh my God, what is going on with my life?
That's a tough one. I mean, maybe it was in the Atlantic. We're talking like 15 years or so ago now. There was a short little personal essay about just that kind of argument, that whole like sort of spiritual bypassing of, I rise above any human difficulty, and if it's not in this moment, then it never happened. It's a way to sort of absolve yourself of responsibility and connection and the messy commitment of being alive and human with other alive humans. It is a messy process, and the more we talk about that, the easier it gets to be messy together.
How do you get people to talk about it? Because it's like religion, it's like politics, and you jump into a subject like that, and you may one time in the backyard of someone's house get into someone's head and heart, but they don't want to ever touch it again because you got too close.
Yeah, I think we have to give people the agency or the permission to have their own pacing. Mm-hmm. I think all we can do, like, you can't force somebody to open up and be vulnerable to you, right? Like if I don't know you and I'm like, no, you need to open up with your feelings, you're just going to retreat more and more and more. Nobody likes to be told what to do, especially with something that is really tender. So how do we create environments that welcome that conversation? How do you make yourself, through your words, through your deeds, through your actions, through the way that you live, how do you make yourself a place that is safe and welcoming for somebody else's tenderness and scary things. We don't do that by aggressively moving forward and demanding access to the inner world, because storming the inner world gates, not going to work.
See, and that's why I think the workplace has got to change, because on this side of the work world, I mean, we all became different people, and I think these new bosses and stuff like that are going to have to showcase some empathy as we go back to work.
I think that's true. And I think we need to help the workplace and help HR directors and help employers and team leaders. I think we need to help them by building a structure by which they can open these conversations. If we just ask them, if we just say like, okay, friends, okay, bosses, team leaders, you suddenly have to show more empathy. How are they supposed to know how to do that? I mean, could you do that? Could you rattle off exactly the ways that you were going to change an entire culture? No. This is why we have to have these conversations, so we can start building together the kinds of structures that let us build the world that we want. I think we can sometimes think that like, oh, these mean bosses or these mean systems, but what are the structures by which they are allowed to be human and inclusive and empathetic to the needs of the very human workforce?
You know, a few minutes ago, you talked about how we can all bump into a bad condition. Has that been redefined? Because we all have different bad conditions. Stubbing my toe or stepping on a Lego is a bad condition, but it's, you know, compare it to what else, you know?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So we easily get into like the Olympics of pain and which one is worse. And the thing here is that all pain is valid. You step on a Lego, that hurts. And it does, especially like if it's dark and it's 3 a.m. and you got up to use the bathroom. Oh my God. That is valid, and you deserve to feel heard and not dismissed for how much that hurts. You know, that sort of empathy is the same love and care that everybody deserves along the spectrum. I think where it gets difficult is because we have such a shortage of compassion and compassionate responses. We get into like, there isn't enough compassion in the world, so you can't have respect or kindness for what's hurting you, because then there's less for me in the world.
See, compassion is one of those words that during my daily writing and even in the defrag, I will sit there and I will look it up in the dictionary, and then I say, all right, creative mind, write me 3 pages of what compassion is in this moment of now.
Nice. Yeah. I love that. And compassion is an active presence, right? Yes. It is not, sure, it can get defined in the dictionary, but gosh, I should know this, but it's been a while since I looked it up, but it's like to suffer with, right? To have passion with, to suffer with. And that is an active practice. I love that you can write 3 pages on what that means to you in this moment.
Oh, I believe that.
What does it mean what does it mean in this situation? Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say,
I get so excited about this topic.
Oh, me too. I mean, you're so up my alley. I blame all this on Julia Cameron in The Artist Way, because I mean, she's the one
right?
that opened things up.
We can lay it all at her feet.
Oh, absolutely.
I think that's a great idea.
Oh my God. I mean, it's crazy, because I mean, people I think are using words that they don't know how to properly use, and I just wish sometimes they would grab their phone and say, all right, I need the definition of empathy, because I think that we're doing it wrong.
Yeah. I think we've got it conflated with permission giving. We can go back to a different usage of the word permission this morning. I think that we think if like somebody is doing this terrible thing, and we think the compassionate response is to not challenge them about it, not stop them from burning down the world, that is actually not the compassionate response. Compassion has a ferocity in it and a protective aspect to it. I think that we've got empathy and compassion confused with everything is okay, right? There is a way to have loving compassion and boundaries at the same time, and those things aren't in conflict with each other.
We're going to hit a subject here that I hope listeners will tap into, because like I said before, you know, I love creating things that people can relate with, but you really brought up a very scary moment on your podcast, speaking with the trained who are also going through times of depression and or grief. It's like, wait a second. That would be like if I came to you for help and you're going through the same thing. It's like, oh my God, you know, it's like, you know, we look up only to find out that we are equal or one is below.
Yeah. This idea that the professionals are somehow above human messiness. And we're seeing this so much more because we're seeing the news reports, and for me in my world, the personal reports of what's happening in the healthcare industry, right? The pressures on the healthcare industry over the last couple of years, and all of these headlines that say like, oh, it's so important to focus on your mental health. Like, who do you think is cleaning up this mess? who do you, where The therapists are living through this too. The social workers, the nurses, your primary care physician, they are all living through the same soup that we are. And, I do mention in that first episode of the podcast, like this doesn't mean that you shouldn't go to your professionals for help and lean on them for help. But I think we need to understand as a structure, as a society, that the ways that we deal with stressful situations, this can't hold, right? If we keep saying, go talk to your therapist, like the therapists are like, my people died over the last 2 years too, and I had some job insecurity, and I've been home with 3 children under 5. Like, the people that we lean on to make sense of the world are also living in the same world as we are, and this really points to, the structural challenges, the systemic challenges in the mental health and healthcare fields. Those aren't new; they didn't just suddenly arrive. But the extra added pressure of the last couple of years has made those cracks completely unsustainable. There's an interesting upheaval happening. Yeah,
we're living in a crisis mode that people are trying to shove underneath the carpet, and that is that school systems are paying their school teachers bonuses if you can just stay half the year, and I'll give you another bonus if you can stay the entire year. The teachers are leaders; they are givers. They believe in structure. What is going to happen to the generations when the real teachers are not there anymore?
That is such a big question. So when the pandemic first happened, I was talking with an advisor of mine, and I was like, in my industry, we're looking at this and thinking like, gosh, the waves of grief and suffering that are going to spiral out of this are immense. And he was like, what are you talking about? This was like, end of March 2020. He's like, what are you talking about? It hasn't really hit. Like, it's not going to be a big deal. I was like, how about all of the kids who are missing out on social connection?
Yep.
And we know that social connection is a big part of brain development. What is going to happen to the kids for whom school was the only safe place? What are we going to do with the teachers? Like, we could just go on for hours about all of it's just one big web, right? Like, you can't touch one part without making the rest of it vibrate. And to answer your question, I don't know.
Yeah.
What I do know is that we have to start talking about this stuff. We can't hope that there's some heroic fleet of younger teachers who are going to come in and be able to handle the chaos and the lack of support that is part of the current U.S. educational system. That's not going to happen. There is no white knight white knight racist. There is no hero that's going to arrive that will be able to thrive in these kinds of systems. We have to start talking about, what else do we want to build together? Mm-hmm. What kind of community, what kind of structure, what kind of conversations do we need to have in order to move forward from this place? And this is part of why this podcast exists, to really talk about these realities. The teachers are helpers too. Mm-hmm. I think we got to understand that teachers are healthcare workers.
Oh my God, that's so true. That's so true. In a really weird way, hereafter, your podcast and iHeartRadio, I'm going to sound totally weird by sharing this with you. It's going to be, in the very beginning, a dirty little secret, because nobody wants to admit that they were listening to the Carpenters, but they loved listening to the Carpenters. It's going to be the same thing, Megan. They're not going to admit that I listened to Megan, but when they start seeing change, they're going to say, why are you so upbeat? Well, I listened to Megan.
I love that. And we've got my pup here chiming in with her enthusiasm.
I love it. That's what podcasting's all about, man.
Right? Somebody has the audacity to walk by the house while it's still dark.
That's it.
I love that. Now, I hope that it doesn't stay a dirty little secret, because I want people to get hooked on it.
Yes.
And here's the thing is, like, when you actually start having these conversations, people want to have them. As long as we're not like, the opening of the podcast for episode 1 is like, I know y'all don't want to talk about this, but let's talk about why it's okay to talk about this, right? Because I know this is scary stuff. If you're scanning through your podcast, library, and you see the description, you're like, I do not want to talk about that. That sounds terrible. Well, let's make it less terrible, right? These are awkward conversations. And as I say, again, in episode 1 of Hereafter, everything is awkward. Not talking about this stuff is awkward. Talking about this stuff is awkward. Only one of those choices has the chance to make things better for everybody. So if awkward is non-negotiable, let's do the awkward and the weird of like talking about this stuff. And I do hope that it catches on. I do hope that people listen and tune in and come back and practice the things that I encourage you to practice, because gosh, it's hard out there. It's hard out there.
People experience grief in so many different ways, and I think that the way that I handle it is wrong compared to a lot of others, because I read the Dalai Lama's book, The Art of Dying, and I really do believe in the birth and rebirth and of the human life, but not crying at my mother's death, bothers my family deeply, when in fact I welcomed my mother into my own mind, body, and soul. Grief causes fights. I mean, fights that really go into long term.
It does, because I think we equate, we'll just use yours for an example, if I may, like not crying at a funeral. I think from the outside, we equate that with, you don't love her. Mm-hmm. And that's not right. That's not correct. First of all, we have no business judging somebody else's outward emotional response. We have no idea what's going on in their heart and their mind. So judgment is never a healthy, good, solid response. But everybody's going to grieve differently. Look, your mom died, but every person in your family lost somebody different. Mm-hmm. One person dies, everybody lost someone different. The way that you are going to grieve is going to be as unique and individual as the way you love that person.
Yep. Yeah.
The trick here is not to assess how much something is affecting somebody by their outward display or how they talk about it. I mean, they don't know. You could have gone home and cried. They don't know.
Right.
But the trick is sort of the wrong word, but we're going to use it for time's sake. The trick here is to approach differences with curiosity instead of condemnation, right? I noticed that you didn't cry at mom's funeral. I couldn't stop crying, and most of us couldn't. What was that like for you?
Yeah.
Or I cry when I'm sad. What do you do? And the other part of that is to not rate one way of dealing with loss or expressing grief as better than another. If you say to me, like, I really practice this, like I've taken her into me and that brings you comfort, that's awesome. I love that. Some people will use that sort of weaponizing that belief system, right? Where like, you need to stop being so sad. She's in the ethers all around us. You need to take her into you. Do you hear the difference there? If it is true for you, I love that for you.
Yeah.
Other people can express the way that they can express. So this is sort of the emotional free-for-all, right? Like whatever you need to do in your own mind and heart that feels true for you, awesome. That is the thing to do. And let's offer the other beings in our space the sovereignty and the respect that the way that they express grief is correct for them at this time.
Your podcast is going to affect a lot of people in the most positive way, in the way of digging inside their head and heart. What my biggest fear is that they're going to go to google.com to locate answers. Do you have a website that you're going to lead them to so that there can be a stronger connection? Because, come on, 45-minute podcast is awesome. But you know what? Sometimes people need 47 minutes.
That's right. Yeah. And this isn't just a once and you're done thing, right? We're talking about the complexity of being human in a tough world. So 2 places that people can go for the helpers, the professional helpers. You can go to megandevine.co, and that is a divine, D-E-V as in Victor, I-N-E, megandevine.co. That is where you will find trainings that we have coming up. And if you want really solid information about grief itself, the website for that is refugeingrief.com. You can also find Refuge in Grief on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter at Refuge in Grief. There is great information there, mostly around normalizing all grief responses. Because we don't talk about the reality of grief, most people think that they're weird for the things that they experience. And I really want people to know that they're normal.
Oh, I love your heart. You've got to come back to this show anytime in the future, Megan. The door is always going to be open for you.
Why, thank you.
I love the confidence. You be brilliant today, okay?
Thank you. You too.